Hello, welcome, Adam.
Hi there, how are you doing?
Good. Catherine, do you mind turning off your camera? Lovely, sorry. There we go, we got a beautiful picture instead. Yes, so welcome, Adam. This is the Finborough Forum, and it's a space where we invite guests to come along and chat about the industry and stuff, and give their insights and all sorts of things like that. I've got a little bio to read out about you to introduce you to the group. Please feel free to interject or give commentary on it if you really want to. So Adam Lenson here tonight is a London-based director, dramaturg and producer. He specialises in new musical theatre. He founded ALP Musicals, a company which disrupts and challenges what musical theatre can be. In 2017, he founded the concert series Signal, which has showcased hundreds of new writers. And in 2020, Signal went online in response to lockdown and pandemic, which reached many new audiences, national and international, and also was like very groundbreaking in terms of technology and streaming and online things, which led to Adam founding also in 2020 Theatrical Solutions, which is a company that specializes in digital theatre, live streaming, and transmedia work. So the chances are, if any of you have watched any streaming theatrical stuff across the last couple of years, Adam will probably have been involved in some way in making that magic happen. In 2021, he was named in the Stage 100 for these contributions to the theatre industry. And also, he debuted his one-person show, But What If You Die, at the Camden People's Theatre, which was live streamed. And he performed it as well as writing it and composing for it. And in 2021, busy year, he wrote and published this book, which is called Breaking Into Song, Why You Shouldn't Hate Musicals, which I highly recommend. It's full of all sorts of insights into both the industry, but also the form of musical theatre, of which he is very passionate about. He is very active on Twitter, involved in lots of activist work, which we'll touch on later on. But is recently considering moving slightly away from social media and has started a weekly Substack newsletter, which I suggest you should all subscribe to because it's really great. It comes out every Thursday. He's had a very kind of dynamic and responsive career, which I think is demonstrated by how he's responded digitally as a producer and an artist in the last couple of years. Yeah, and should make for a really interesting discussion. Do you think that sort of covers?
Thanks for that, Billy.
He's also brilliant and very funny.
I try my best, but that was weird hearing myself read out.
Well, you know, he is also very good at Wordle.
Do you like Wordle? It is the thing at the moment. I like it more than banana bread.
Yes, yes. All the tweets which are like, Wordle is the banana bread, or yeah, and I'm like, well, yes, I can actually eat Wordle. Not that I can really, but you know. Cool. Okay, should we get started?
Sure.
So Carmen always starts, who previously has hosted most of these, with a big old broad question about how you got here and why theatre, in your case, why musical theatre. So take us back. How did that come about?
I was actually a lot of things get explained by the fact that I was like a really sensitive, nerdy kid that had like too many emotions, I think, but I really liked science as well. And I think one of those reasons was I had open heart surgery when I was 5. And so I had quite serious, I was a doctor when I was very young said that I was like a medical textbook and that I had all of these like strange things wrong with me that just kind of relentlessly had these things wrong with me that kind of meant that I was always in and out of hospitals. And so I was really interested in science. I was very sort of sensitive and emotional, and I got through school not really doing any theatre whatsoever. I did a couple of school plays, but mostly I was just like into video games and comic books and other nerdy things. And then I got to university and I was studying to be a doctor. because again, medicine and health and science and people seemed to be the thing I should do. I went to a pushy school, which basically was just like, you know, go and do a proper career. And I'm a North London Jewish person, which means, you know, my parents sacrificed a lot and were children of immigrants, and, you know, really wanted me to do something stable and proper with my life, but I didn't, because I guess I was too emotionally unstable to kind of follow that through. It just wasn't working for me, and I started doing student theatre, and I really liked I think theatre is the kind of perfect mixture of art and science. It's like this kind of constructed, interwoven, stacked, kind of quite technical thing, which kind of appeals to the science part of my brain, but it's also this kind of very immediate philosophical, emotional discovery that I just, being in a room of people, I find so moving. But like I said, it also really appeals to the science part of my brain. And that, I guess, is why I got really into digital theatre in the last few years, because I've always been a kind of latent nerd that loves computers and plays video games, and I can use a lot of computer programs, always have been able to. And then suddenly it became evident that that was a new skill that would kind of help in the current moment. So, and I guess the only other piece of my story I would say is I've always liked musicals, I think, just because of the fact that I really like emotion, and for me theatre has always been a way of like understanding massive philosophical questions and massive emotional questions, and that's the sort of thing I'm interested in, and that's why music is such a big important part of my life. That felt a bit waffly, but hopefully I got to some things interesting.
No, it's not waffly at all. And I mean, considering I've read a lot about your journey in your book, it's like every time I hear it, there's always something new, which I think is testament to how like everybody's lives are so interesting, and how we all end up in theatre for like not similar reasons, but there's common threads, I think, often in what draws us to it.
I love the fact about theatre that there's no one journey, and that everyone has this kind of completely different everything is so wiggly.
Yeah, definitely.
It's like one of the best things about theatre, and it's one of the worst things about theatre, because there's just, you can't copy anyone else's life, you can't do any of the same things that someone else has done and be guaranteed the same outcomes. You just sort of have to just find your own path through, which is as exhilarating as it is terrifying. So.
True. So you sort of mentioned that you started like doing student theatre. Was that as a performer, or did you get into directing pretty quick?
No, it was mostly performing. It was acting in musicals. I was a small part in Merrily We Roll Along. Was the first show I did. I was in the ensemble of My Fair Lady and Me and My Girl.
Amazing.
I do it in South Pacific. So yeah, I did a lot of acting in musicals. And then I got to the end, to my final year, and that's when I first started directing. But I didn't direct much actually at uni. I directed two things. I directed a Stephen Sondheim review called Marry Me a Little, which actually was really great, because for anyone that knows it, it's basically just a series of songs about two characters who live next door one another. So it's basically all tone and character and no plot whatsoever. So as a director, it's kind of all on you to kind of decide what you want to make it about. It's kind of got like a music video quality in that way, in that it's like an expressive sort of 70-minute thing, and you can sort of do what you want, which on the one hand is like, you don't necessarily want directors who just make it all about themselves. But as a first piece to direct, it's only two people. It was all these amazing Sondheim songs, and there was no wrong way to do it. It was a real feeling of freedom, of like figuring out what directing was. So I did that, and then I did a Michael John Cusack musical called See What I Want to See, and it was a new musical to the UK. It's the UK premiere. It had been done in New York a couple of years before, and I fell in love with it when I found it on CD at Dress Circle, and I was like, this is like a weird this is like, I'd listened to Sondheim, but this was a musical based on Japanese short stories about truth, and the way in which truth is this, like, can be this kind of nebulous, slippery thing. And I was like, and one of them had been the basis of a Kurosawa movie called Rashomon. So I was like, wait, this is like a musical that's based on Japanese short stories about truth and perception and philosophy, and like, it's so avant-garde and pretentious. And I remember thinking, why are musicals seen as so dumb when they can be so amazing? And so that gave me the bug. It also gave me the bug for directing things I hadn't seen before. I don't know about anyone else, but I have this thing where if I've seen something done well, I immediately get too insecure to ever want to do it. So a lot of the reasons why I got really interested in new stuff was because I was like, I don't know, I've seen Something in the Park with Georgia in the West End. What am I gonna? And it was amazing, and it was huge budget, and I'm 22. What am I gonna offer that in a student theatre? So I got really into that idea of doing new things because there was no basis for comparison. So on the one hand, it felt like you could break new ground, which is like an exciting thing, but it also felt like there was much less fear for me of like trying to go where someone else had already been and do it worse.
Well,
that's why I've never done a Sondheim professionally. I love Sondheim like a mad person, but I've never really felt that I wanted to do one professionally, because I was just like, well, what can I offer this?
I think it's also enabled you to really like build a career and like you know, all entirely out of like breaking new ground, which is pretty extraordinary, actually.
It's yeah, and I suppose it was on the, if you think of the two things I directed at uni, one was like a sort of like a plotless song cycle, and one was like a new musical that had never been done in the UK before. That kind of set the course, I suppose. But it's great breaking new ground. It's also, I would say it's harder for people to kind of spot what you're doing when there's nothing to compare it to. So the idea of comparison is this really interesting thing, because I think one of the ways that people really show themselves off is being like, you've never seen a production of King Lear like the one I'm doing.
I was just going to say, this version of Hamlet is like the version.
So it's like quite hard to be like, look at this great version of this show you've never heard of. I'm doing like, but in good news, it's like, if you're doing it well, it's hard to tell where the writing ends and the production begins. Like, they should be, if it's new, they should be impossible to discern. You don't want to be like, what a terrible musical, but what a great production. So
I mean, that does happen quite often, but enough said about that. So your kind of first three shows were actually at the Finborough, weren't they?
I love the Finborough.
And so I wondered if you could talk about that and your experiences as a baby director working at the Finborough. And
I mean,
were all three of them musicals?
No, one was a play.
Okay.
I would say I was trying to do a bit of everything when I started out, which although I clearly always had a big love for musicals, but I didn't want to be a tricky thing. I think it was maybe even slightly harder then, but it's still hard now. Is if you do too many musicals, people just make assumptions about the sort of person that you are. Oh, that person's a musicals person. And I really like plays, don't get me wrong, and I really like a lot of things. So I was looking to have as varied a life as I could and do as much to learn as I could. But I think gradually over the last few years, as I've really decided to kind of drill down on what I'm here for, it has felt like musicals. But no, I was assistant directing and running and making props and doing other things that you do when you first start. And I had been Googling, looking for writers on the internet, and I had been typing in the names of people like Adam Getzel and Jason Robert Brown and that kind of era of writer into Google. And I found a composer on MySpace, which ages me, but I found a composer on MySpace who had those writers in his influences box, and he was called Adam Guan. And at the time he had 4 songs on his MySpace page, which were just demos sung by him. And I wrote to him and I said, I really like those demos. And he do you have any more of that? Because his email address was just on his website, because that's when people, you know. and he posted me the script and a CD. That was how long ago it was, that I think like even putting demos on YouTube or like demos out there was, yeah, he posted it to me. And
that's so amazing in like every level.
I know what it was like. 2008. It's not that long ago. Anyway, he posted it to me, and I just thought it was amazing. And I wrote to Neil and I said, I've got this really good musical, I think. And Neil gave me a Sunday Monday slot, which was 6. I don't know if, I think it's similar now, but at the time it was just 2 weekends. It was 2 Sundays and Mondays. So it's 4 performances. Maybe it was 3. No, I think it was 4. And all I'll say is, and I know Neil might be listening, which is that like Neil's production guide, the guide for like young directors and producers at the Finborough, the PDF, I think I like learned almost everything I knew from that guide. I remember at the time the idea that like, oh, there's like this instruction manual, but it was, as a first time maker of any sort, there are still things that from that guide that live in my brain. White posters look cheap, always on my mind. White posters look cheap. Never like, don't put your name at bigger, you know, at the top of the poster, except in a tiny font. Call it a national tour, not a UK tour in the biogs, like the way biogs are formatted. Anyway, I just remember thinking it was the most, that guide, you know, I think it should be published.
To jump in here, the guide started out in 1996 as 4 pages, and basically every single time anybody has cocked up, it goes in, which is why it's now like nearly 200 pages. And it's in bold and big letters. Multiple people have cocked up many times on this one item. I will now shut up.
No, it's an amazing thing, because it does feel like you go, oh, here are the mistakes other people have made, and I'm
yes, and
I'm going to benefit from them. And also, you know, you saying this is how someone who knows nothing is going to do a passable job in my theatre, which again is I did know nothing. So yeah, did that. And then that went really well. And then we lost the rights of that show because it went to off-Broadway. But a year and a half later, we did eventually get to transfer that production from 4 nights of the Finborough. It went to Trafalgar Studios, the Trafalgar 2 for a month, which was amazing. One of the things Neil said was, cast as high as you can, cast as high as you dare. Like, ask the people who you dream about doing the show, and they bloody did. Like Julie Atherton, she literally just finished Avenue Q, and she did our Sunday Monday show at the Finborough, and that's always really stuck in my brain, which is, if something's new and interesting, ask the person you want to do it. If they've got the time, if they've got the capacity, they might just do it. And it really, again, I think I never would have been brave enough to do that if Neil hadn't told me to. But so then I pitched another Michael John Lacusa show called Little Fish. We did that in 2009. And then in 2010, basically this was what I was doing. I was directing 1 show a year at that point, and it was at the Finborough. And then I did this show called Saturn Returns, which is a new American play by Noah Heidel, which is very much like a musical, actually. It was 3 different versions of the same man over a period of 90 years, kind of all living together in the same sort of house of ghosts and memories. And I'm obsessed with time and memory and music, and the way memories can like stack on top of one another, which is why I like musicals. So even the play I did at the Finborough was a bit like a musical. I've got some pictures. I can just quickly, I can show you bits of my website. This is Little Fish. This set was so amazing. Look at that. It was reverse end on, so that's going into, anyway, that's like a whole big cluster of things which kind of popped out.
It looks so cool.
There's Laura Pitt Pulford right at the beginning of her career, but she's gone on to be lots of things. There's like a bed that pops out. Yeah, like lots of things that pop out. Anyway, so that's that. And then Saturn Returns. Don't have that many pictures of this, but that was much more of like a box set play. I'll tell you the cool thing, we wallpapered the Finborough wall, which you're not allowed to do. Well, we did it in a way that you're allowed to, is that we put masking tape on the back wall, and then we double-sided taped to the masking tape and then wallpapered onto that. So we literally, Beck, the designer, did that for the whole back wall, which means it did just come off, but we were like absolutely terrified that the lights would heat it up and it would all just fall off in the middle of the show. But like with that beautiful window area at the Finborough, that the sort of like hexagon side, we just like wallpapered the whole thing. It took a long time. Yeah, so I love the Finborough. I learned genuinely almost everything I know there, and I think it really all three of the things I did there were European premieres, were like first time that ever happened, and that is an amazing thing to like take that leap. And it taught me that there were places that would take those leaps. And I, you know, at the time I sometimes look back at myself then and go, who the hell was I to be that precocious, to do those things? But I think you just think, if I don't, there are so many people trying to do this and so many people trying to make theatre, that if I don't leap, then what hope have I? Which I now agree with even more. But I tell you what, I'm sort of amazed at what I managed to do. Little Fish had a cast of 8 and a band of 3, and
the Finborough Sweeney.
We had 4 moving lights.
Cool.
Yeah, it was hot in there though. There was pre-air conditioner days, and so the vents of the moving lights made it even hotter. But we learned.
We're sort of like, because like this is great and it's been like we've been ambling on. No, it's fine. I'm just like going through my list of questions being like, not going to ask that, not going to ask that. Okay. But something I always enjoy hearing you speak about is craft, and you write and speak a lot about craft in musical theatre as a form and not a genre. And I wondered if you would like to talk a little bit about the craft of musical theatre and why it speaks to you and why it's so important. I mean, you sort of touched on it about like the stacking and the emotional resonance of it, but there's very much a binary, like theatre versus musical theatre in our industry. So, you know.
No, I mean, look, I sort of alluded to it before, but I quickly have noticed that for whatever reason, musical theatre is not seen as an art form in quite the same way in England as the play is. And I think maybe that's down to the fact that the play is kind of one of our great cultural, the great British play is like one of our great cultural exports and kind of like historical inventions. And the musical is an American form in terms of the way it's celebrated. Although, I mean, to be fair, musical and operetta and kind of, there are many ways in which that's not precisely true. But I don't know, my awareness is that people think musicals are low art and dumb and entertainment. And actually, I don't mean entertainment in a bad way, but people just often undermine the form. And it bugs me because they're so hard to make. They're so hard to make. And when you are watching one that is working, that dizzying kind of like weaving of those different forms of information, the thing I always say is that a good one makes your brain light up in more places than almost any other art form, because you've got visuals and you've got sound and you've got movement and you've got that lyric. It's that Yip Harburg quotation, which you might have heard, which is words let you think a thought, music lets you feel a feeling, a song lets you feel a thought, and that idea of like almost that impossible, intangible cross wiring of like music and words and everything else. That just musicals are so hard because of the amount of information that you're balancing and trading back and forward between words and songs, and they're just so undermined and so hard to make. So I've just spent a lot of time sort of fighting for those who care about them, and also really within this country fighting for them to allow to be mature. And I always say, the other thing I always say to people is I direct musicals that are not for children, which I mean is I make musicals for people who are above 18, because like, frankly, you're not going to take a 12-year-old to a Carol Churchill play. So, and that's fine. Like, I think musicals should be afforded that same level of maturity. So that's sort of where my interest is. And yeah, I think Little Fish, especially as a musical, is like, it's about a woman trying to quit smoking and then sort of dissociating and dealing with effects of PTSD from an abusive relationship and trauma. And meanwhile, one of her friends is in a domestically abusive relationship, and another of her friends has been diagnosed with breast cancer and is dealing with that idea of being remembered. And when you say that that's a musical, I think people would just be like, what, really? And I did that in 2009. And I remember at the time saying, I'm really passionate about people hearing that a musical can be about this. And I think, God, that was in 2009. It's still bloody hard to convince people that can be true. So anyway, I don't know if I've answered your question, except to just say,
you did, but there's something in your book which really stuck with me, which is that you describe musical theatre as being a form and not a genre.
Medium, yeah.
A medium and a form, like a way of doing something, and not just like people just assume that the genre of music is like jazz hands. And
when you say genre, when someone says genre, it tends to think about it. We think of like a genre of music, like pop music, rock music, like and I notice a lot of the time people say musical theatre is a genre, and that to me, it comes with a very slim set of associations. And so I'm always saying, please, can you call it a medium or a form, not a genre? Because if something's a medium, then it can have multiple genres within it. There can be a rom-com musical, and there can be a horror musical, and there can be like social realism musical, maybe not social realism, but or there can be like,
I mean, why not?
why, like a kind of, I'm sure you could do sort of like, but the idea suddenly comes that as soon as you suggest that musical theatre is a form rather than a genre, that it can just be anything. And I really truly believe that it can be anything. And the reason I always say that is because for me, music is everything. And actually, the moments that music exists in my life or has existed in my life are the most profound moments. They're like, I always use this, musicals are like first dates and funerals and weddings and they remind us of those friends at school like that. They remind us of that person who haven't seen for a while like that. They're like mental marker points for like these incredibly profound moments. And so if music is that, then musicals can be that. I just think so often they're just really frivolous, or seem to be frivolous or not given that room. So I guess with that, if I put it all together, since my time at the Finborough and starting at the Finborough, that's what I've been trying to do, is just make people think musicals are worthwhile. Interestingly, like a big theatre, the other day wrote an email to me about a piece and said in it, we'd have to be thinking about this as a commercial piece that could potentially transfer. And so we've been like applying sort of commercial ideas of lenses of dramaturgy to it in terms of like accessibility and kind of amount of plot and the way it moves. And it just made me go, musicals are always codified as commercial and as accessible and entertainment. And if they are, then they get hemmed into that same place over and over again. And it really bugs me, because I always say that a piece is like an organism, and if you trust the writer, you trust the writer to make the piece what they can, and then at that point everyone around the piece has to trust the organism of the piece itself to kind of accept and reject what it needs. Like I would say, it's almost like you put a new organ into it and it either accepts or rejects. You put a new song, or sometimes it's like this self-determination. So coming then back to that thing and going, no, you're not going to be what you want to be, you're not going to be what you need to be genetically or sort of evolutionarily, you're going to be what we need you to be as a theatre, kind of annoys me, because then people force their musicals to be a certain thing, and then when they don't succeed, they go, oh, there mustn't have been hunger or appetite, or mustn't have been
and then you can feel that in an audience, can't you, when something is not quite authentic or doesn't quite hit where it needs to hit, often because it just doesn't yeah, you can't necessarily articulate what that is, but it has an impact, I think.
Someone once told me, this is with reference to plays, but you know, as a playwright, if you're not careful, and if you write towards a building, you know, like, oh, we want to write a royal court play, or we want to write a bush play, or what you're ending up doing is you end up kind of like sort of like modifying your play to have features that place will recognize and like, and maybe you'll start taking notes from a reader there or a literary department there. You'll end up with something that it sort of feels like it's trying to be everything. Trying, you know, it's kind of misshapen by that intention to try and speak to everybody's notes. And I've just found more and more that it should just be about making the thing that you want. Unfortunately, making the thing that you want can be harder to get traction or pitch for, but I think it's the most satisfying way to live your life. And on a bad day, when I'm having a bad day at like my sort of like this sort of career that I've made of my own volition a lot of the time, and I sometimes will get sad because I'll be like, you know, if I stop, no one will care really. Like I'm setting my own deadlines and I'm sort of making things happen for myself even now. But I just look at it and I just go, I get so much happiness from knowing that we did it that our way, and I let writers be themselves, and I let people be themselves rather than have to like fit into the other people's boxes. Because I think for musicals,
yeah, which is brilliant, and you facilitate so many spaces for that, like especially through Signal and stuff like that. We've hit the half an hour point, but I want to sneak in a last question, which I'm going to merge a few together in terms and speaking to like your kind of career being very dynamic and involving lots of different things. So you wear lots of hats as a producer, and also as an artist and a writer, an author, an activist. I mean, we haven't even touched on your like enormous thing that happened last year in response to rare metal earth at the Royal Court and stuff. Like, but you're just one person, right? And you like, I mean,
but the answer I would give is because I've always really been a freelancer. You know, I've had some like long assisting contracts, I suppose, but the majority of the time I've always been a freelancer, and I've always been a freelancer in mostly, let's say, musical theatre. And so because of that, I've always been making or caring about making a product. The way I always describe it is I make a product for which there's no shop. Musical theatre is a product for which, even if you make a bloody good one, there's almost no one that wants to stock it, and there's no supply chains, and there's no infrastructure or landscape. So I've been doing that for a long time, which means I'm naturally have just become, I would say, two things, which is a hustler and sort of someone who just like sets my own deadlines. And then the other thing I would say I've become is reactive, because it's just me. So I can just be like, my obligations are small in terms of in terms of there aren't many deadlines I have to hit, or else I will be letting down a theatre. So it just means that I can divert my attention pretty quickly. So if I decide I want to do something new, I probably can. And it's all sort of part of the same ongoing endeavor. But I think what happened was I wanted to direct a certain type of musical, a thoughtful, mature, new musical, and there were very few spaces for it. So I became someone who spoke up for the Forum. And then I realized I'm going to all these meetings and I'm speaking up for the Forum and I'm speaking out about the Forum, and it's still not making more opportunities for the stuff I care about. So I guess I will have to produce. So then I started producing, and only at small scale, but then I just started, you know, and then I was like, there's no one that's really systemically making sure that there's regular concerts of new work in the same way there are in New York. So that's when I started a concert series, and then did that for a while. And then I've always had this like huge belief that devised and collaborative theatre and musicals are basically the same in terms of it's like in multidisciplinary. into.
Interesting you say that, because that's the type of theatre I make, and then I fell into music.
Exactly. So I've always had lots of friends who are interdisciplinary theatre makers, devised theatre makers, who like live in what feels like a next door world to musical theatre, but it feels very similar. So I'd always in the back of my mind thought I'd really like to make a devised show, not necessarily a solo show, but just and then I was ill in 2019. I'm fine now in most ways, but like I had a cancer diagnosis in 2019. And it just sort of gave me the kick. The oncologist said to me, he said, you have a very, very interesting way of talking about cancer, because he said, I've never met anyone who has studied medicine and is a theatre maker, so, and is undergoing cancer in their 30s. So there was like this weird trio of things, which he said was quite rare, because I do know a lot. He basically said to me, have you been on Google, because you know so much about cancer? And I was like, no, I just know a lot about it, because I was nearly a doctor. So suddenly this idea came up that I would try and make a show about it, and I applied for Camden People's Theatre's starting block scheme, which is for new collaborative show, new theatre makers, and I got it. So I was like, oh, I guess I make theatre now, and I'm good. But it's sort of a different thing. But then also when I got cancer, I got more into my religion, not necessarily religiously, but in terms of my culturally. And then of course, that was exactly the time when Celador were casting No Jews in falsettos. So I suddenly became outspoken at that. And then I wrote a book. It all feels like it's connected, but all I will say,
it does feel very connected. It feels very kind of holistic in many ways, and all sort of like,
I can always just I can grab whatever I want. The thing I always say that is, there are bad things about being ever a freelancer in terms of life structure. But to tell you the really good thing, I can wake up in the morning and say, wish I could do something like this. And I can design the logo and I can put it on Twitter and it will be done in an hour. Like it will be happening in an hour. I've done that so many times where I've gone, it'd be really cool if there was like a concert about this. And I'll just be like, great, I'll do it. I'll say I'm doing it. And there's no board to tell. There's no team of people to convince. And so it does mean I can be very, very reactive and to how I'm feeling. But
I also think that your reactions seem to have a pretty good measure of like the industry on a broader scale. And like, it's just what our industry needs, is people exactly like you.
I hope so. I think I think what I've become aware of as time goes on is, I would say that like when I first started out, I'm a reasonably polite person. I'm not a rebellious person. I kind of tended to go through the front door my whole life until I started working in theatre. And I think what I came to realize was it's really, really hard to forge a path. And if you do the same thing as people who've done it already, likely it is it won't work out. It's you can't copy someone. You sort of have to be yourself. And I started to go, okay, well, how am I myself? I'll care about musicals. I'll care about being Jewish. I'll care about the things that make me me. And then, so when you come to moments where you go, wait a second, I'm going to care about things that make me me. Why does no one else give a fuck about that? Like, why does no one care about musicals? Like, why are people being so dismissive of something I care about so much? And I was watching other people I know be themselves and care about Shakespeare or care about new writing, or care about verbatim theatre, and they were getting further quicker. And after a little while of interrogating that, I was like, I guess I'll speak up for it. And I think I'm square with the fact that maybe it won't all, there maybe is no mainstream future for me, but like I get to do a lot of things that I absolutely love, and maybe I don't get the career I quite imagine. You know, everyone imagines a certain career when they start, and then that morphs and changes. But I when I first worked with Adam Lenson, I was like, I love being the first near the beginning of a new musical and hearing those songs for the first time and getting to decide how they feel, and I get to do that almost every day, so that's pretty cool.
It's very cool. Right, so we've got about 15-20 minutes to open the floor. Does anybody have? Thank you so much, Adam. That was great. And you're so like engaging when you talk as well. And but like I was like, I wrote so many questions down being like, oh, and then, you know, barely needed any to get an entire sessions full.
I'm bad at organizing my thoughts, so it's not always like,
no,
it's not always brief, but it's
yes, but it's always full of like wonderful nuggets and everything. And I would say to everybody that the book is full of all of that and much more.
Who knew that? Like writing
very
a book,
conversational.
Writing a book is so efficient. I've said this to you before, I think, but it's just like you can just go to sleep for a while, and anyone that does choose to read it, it's as if they've had as if you've been speaking to them for 10 hours.
Yeah, it is. And actually, like the way it's structured and the way it reads, it's like it's very much in your voice. So it feels like
I will do the audiobook at some point.
Oh, you've got to. You've got to.
It's definitely written like I talk.
Yeah. All right then. Anybody got? You can either pop your camera on and say something, or show something in the chat if you would prefer not to be on camera. Also, there's only it's not an enormous amount of people on the call, so if you'd like to turn your cameras on, I'm sure at this point it will probably not impact too much anything. And then we have real people here, not just names.
And, you know, whatever, if anything's going on for anyone that you want to talk about, whatever.
Oh yeah, so one of the things that Adam was involved in recently, he was producing something at Vault, and of course Vault's got cancelled, and the pivot that he's done with that show might be an interesting thing if people have any thoughts or otherwise. Looks like somebody's typing, maybe. Don't know. Aha. Okay. Yes, go for it, Sean.
Hello. Just unmuting myself. Thank you. I really enjoyed that. One of the things I wrote down that you said was, I make a product for which there's no shop. I think that really resonated with me, and talking about, you know, trying to sort of squeeze a play into a certain venue. So we didn't kind of really touch on your stuff with live streaming. So just sort of making a link between those two, sort of how can live streaming become that shop front for the product?
Well, thank you. Good question. I think a good example of this was I did a show last October called Shift Alt Right, which was by a writer called Hilmi Jaden. It was his first produced musical ever. It was an hour-long show, and we live streamed it from my flat. So it was sort of one main protagonist and then three other people who came in remotely from where they lived. So it was all done live. And the reason I was really proud of it, I love theatres, don't get me wrong, but we from beginning to end, we produced a show, 700 people watched it, and bought tickets, and we produced this new musical from beginning to end without a theatre's involvement at all. And it was a full-length musical. It was an hour long. We did a cast recording at the same time, which we were able to release. And so for a first-time writer, I would say that Hilmi would have got an awful lot of, you know, exposure from that. And a lot of people were able to watch it, not just in England, but everywhere. Also, no one was able to tell us yes or no. We just did it. There was no gatekeeper at all at any point in that process. So, and then I did another couple of shows, a couple of new musicals at Southwark Playhouse, which were without an audience. So they were just live streamed from a theatre. And we only were there for 1 week for each of those shows. So we were there for a week, we teched the show, and then we did 3 performances. And as a really interesting, you know, and on the one hand, of course, and then we live streamed the shows, but then we could put them on demand afterwards, which means people could watch them when no performances was happening. And what that meant is that we could put shows on much more cheaply. You know, if you're only paying for a week of theatre rent, if you're only paying for, and like, you know, again, those shows outside the Playhouse, I think we were selling, I think we sold 700 or 800 tickets for each of them, which is not that different from like a 2 or 3 week run in a smaller theatre. The tickets were very cheap because they were stream tickets, and we were kind of trying to get volume rather than cost. But and so a lot of the overheads went down, and the audience that could view it still. Also, I don't know if you feel this, but I've often done work where you put it on for a month, and you invite everybody in Earth, and you say, you know, let me know when you can come. And then if their diaries aren't free, they don't come. And I started to see friends who got luckier with people's diaries, essentially. Nothing more than that. They just got luckier with people's diaries. And they would end up with someone seeing their show and liking it and giving them an assistant director job or an opportunity. Great thing about having a film or a streamed version is you can get it to people, and they don't have to be free. So I would say it's exceptionally good for new work. I'd say it's exceptionally good for that gap between where you think, I'm going to read or workshop a piece and put it on. And the other thing I would say is, if you did a reading or a workshop of something, it normally has to be free. Normally, you're not going to charge people to come to a reading. But if you charge people to come, but if you don't, and you're paying all of the actors properly, it might cost £2,000 or £3,000 to do it. Whereas if you can do a high quality stream, make it sound good. Sounding good is even more important than it looking good, I would normally say. But if you can do that, and let's say you only charge £3 or £5 a ticket, you've got a revenue stream suddenly. So I found it really exhilarating, and we were going to do a show at Vault, as Tilly said, and it's now going to be live streamed. And I think for new work, it's great. I'm not sure it's like the best place to do a revival of something that lives in theatre, but if your focus is getting the new work seen and heard, then I'm genuinely sure it's going to be a real game changer, because you know, a few hundred, when we did Shift or Right streamed from my flat, every bit of the money went to the cast, and that's pretty rare as well, to be able to do that.
Great, thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, and also you touched on accessibility. There's that sort of broader accessibility in global terms, but in also in terms of who can actually get to the theatre as well. So it's quite an exciting future, I think.
I've got to watch so many amazing things in America, in Australia, and like I was really obviously plugged into what people were doing, because I was like, I wanted to see what people were doing. And yeah, when we did Shift It Right, it was streamed from my flat, and people would text me afterwards from Canada, from Australia, from America, having just watched it, and that is special. And that feeling of liveness, I mean, I love live streaming for that reason, because you feel like you finish and you've still got the adrenaline of it all, and then people are still relating to it. But I was live streaming because I didn't want to go out, because I was immunocompromised, and I was scared of going to the theatre and being in places that weren't managed. The risk wasn't managed. So, and I would say it's a bit like sport. I'm sure you might have heard this metaphor before, but like, sure, there's nothing like being in the stadium, but like most people watch sport on TV, and that's great. And then the other thing I would always say is every single musical I've ever fallen in love with, I've done so from cast recording. Like my favorite musical is probably Follies, and I loved it for 10 years before I saw it, because cast recordings democratized the way we can experience art. So anyone who's snobby about digital theatre, I'm like, I think you're missing a point about how useful it can be.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm just going to quickly, Jenny, do you want to read out your comment, or do you want me to read it out? I can't hear what you're saying because you're on mute, but
yeah, that's a good point. I was on mute. Yeah, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, if you just read your comment, and then John can ask his question. Or Jonathan can ask his question and then we're good to go.
To jump in before you, just to say thank you so much for everything that you were saying earlier. I'm co-producing and directing a new musical, Josh Schmidt for Adding Machine, and all we hear from everyone who sees it that we get in touch with is this isn't a play, it's a play, it's not a musical. Why are you writing this as a musical? It doesn't make sense as a musical because it deals with issues and ideas, and that's not a musical. So it's really inspiring to hear what you're saying. Thank you. That was my comment.
I love the Adding Machine, and I'm excited about that. I like Josh Schmidt. The isn't it funny that it's always people who know nothing about musicals who love telling you what musicals are? Like, I find that so interesting. No, do you know what I'd say? I think the idea of, that's why I think musicals as a form, not a genre, because the idea of being able to say, oh, that topic isn't a musical. Well, no, I mean, I'm like up for discussions of like diegetic and non-diegetic songs and how information is used in a musical. But even then, I'm growing less and less interested in that idea of trying to discount something as a musical. I like, if something's got music and story, then I'm sort of willing to say it will learn more from thinking itself a musical than not, because the thing I say is that musicals have like so many possible skills in terms of the way that they can interrogate story. They can like jump through time, or they can expand to a massive lens, or like really zoom into a single person's thoughts and what's going on in their brain. And there's just so many malleabilities and flexibilities to what a musical can do. And so I think thinking about something like a musical just means you're more likely to use more of cards that are in the deck than if you don't.
Yeah, totally. I definitely feel like dramaturgically musicals kind of wear their dramaturgy on like that you can, everything is there, whereas often it's slightly less like that in some theatre forms.
Just to flip that round, Jenny, it's just like all plays are nicking from musicals lately. Like all of the big commercial plays, Warhorse, Curious Incident, they're all taking the kind of like stacked woven dramaturgy from musicals, and the kind of the way that music is so front-footed, and kind of movement direction and video design. And so I just think like the fact that plays can co-opt so much of what musicals make, and without fear, but as soon as a musical wants to co-opt from plays, that it somehow shouldn't do. Anyway, of course it makes me grumpy. So all power to you, and I'm excited.
Thank you.
Hey, Jonathan, thank you.
Hi, Adam. First of all, it's really inspiring hearing you talk about anything. It's extraordinary. But also about a field that is completely, I wouldn't say alien to me, but is totally unknown to me, apart from the fact that I actually did once play the part of Professor Higgins in my play.
It's a good part.
Good part, yeah. But I'd like to hear you talk a little bit more about the music part of it, because you have touched on it, you know, the force of it. So if you would expand a little bit more on that, because I just find it absolutely fascinating. And also, you've mentioned, Tilly mentioned your activism, which was only briefly touched on. So perhaps you would talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. I don't know, just music is
do you first of all are you
yeah I mean yeah I read music, I play instruments. I played piano and flute at school to a medium degree, but I would say the thing about being a director is it's like I understand a little about a lot of things and how they interact with one another. So like I know a bit about lighting design and a bit about sound design and a bit about video, but like I don't have to be able to do the job as well as the person who's in my team, nor would I try. But I like, again, I'm like always interested in that vertical thing, which musicals do, which I call the stack, where it's like that chord happens at the same time as that lyric, which happens at the same time as that bit of staging, which happens, and that's when you get those moments of overwhelm for which we know musicals are so amazing. Because but I guess for me, musicals are just the music. I just remember hearing well, first of all, I would say that the musicals I'm interested in are musicals that sound like music, which is, I know, a kind of tautological phrase, but I think too often musicals sound like musicals. I remember there's this thing where Sondheim always said, like, if you want to write musicals, well, it was said of Sondheim, if you want to make musicals that sound like Stephen Sondheim, don't listen to Sondheim, listen to Debussy and Ravel and Stravinsky. And if you want to sound like Jason Robert Brown, don't listen to Jason Robert Brown, listen to Billy Joel. And you know, that it's like all about the artistic descendants of people, that you should be looking up a generation rather than at the people that you want to copy. And the other thing, David Yazbek, who wrote The Band's Visit and a bunch of other Dirty Rotten Scoundrels and stuff, he said if all musical theatres could learn one thing, it was that they should just not listen to musicals for at least a year. And the trouble is, I do think if you love musicals too much and they become the only thing you listen to, then it becomes like a photocopy of a photocopy. So I do think people should listen to music that isn't musicals. But the other thing I remember learning from, I did a course with Robert Carl, who's one of the professors at NYU. And he said, we sometimes forget that music has information in it too. Like, music shouldn't just be this like thing that holds lyric. If we're listening to a musical and it's in a foreign language, we should know what's happening, like a great film score. If we listen to a film score without watching it, we should know what's happening in the same way that we should know visually what's happening if we take a photograph of a play. So I just think it's a brilliant type of information. And yeah, I in terms of the activism stuff, I would just say, I think you can only go so far without, I think you just only go on for so long with people not like ignoring sense is how I found it, before you have to speak up about it. And like I said, I started by just being the guy that overly spoke up about musicals, but I think lately, by caring about anti-Semitism in theatre, it's kind of led me to a real care about intersectional frameworks, where, you know, we have to care about everything if we want to care about anything. So I think lately it's become really important to me that in fighting for what I care about, my communities and my heritage, it's doing that for everyone else, because I think everyone deserves to be able to see themselves in some of the stories that are on stage. It's as simple as that, really. And not out of comparison, but out of acknowledgement of the things that make us unique and rich and speak to our heritage. So I came to notice that I really like Twitter. I know everyone hates it. I mean, it's given me some really bad days. It's given me some really, really bad days. But I think in the main, I really like the ability to thread, which is the ability to like put together lots of small thoughts until you make a big thought. If someone ever said to me, write 1,000 words, until I wrote my book, it was almost impossible, the thought that I could ever do that. But I can have a thought, and then I can have another thought, and then I can have another thought, and then I can have another thought. And I just got really, really into like writing these like long explanatory threads, and people would read them and it would lead to places. So I'm grateful to social media as an activism platform, because while I don't think it's very sorry, I've waffled, but I do think this is important. I don't think social media or most activism actually does change systemic things very quickly. I don't think the people in charge give a shit very often. And I don't think it actually changes that stuff very often. But what it does do is it attracts people who are like-minded into communities and systems. And for me, those communities are my entire life, really. It's like there's this like entire new musical theatre ecosystem that and groups of writers within this country who I've met entirely through us sharing what we care about. And I suppose the only hesitation I would say is you have to spend slightly more time on the things that you mutually care about than the time on sharing what makes you angry. And I think that's really hard. It's really hard. It's really hard not to be pissed off about things more than you are generally optimistic. So I'm just always trying to show people I care more than I'm angry. But the two are often sides of the same coin.
I think you're pretty good at doing that, establishing a pretty good balance.
I try. I think if people have never met me before or never heard me speak in real life, and they've just seen the threads that get or the tweets that get amplified, I think you could think I'm more horrible than I think I am. But...
Well, you're very definitely not. We've got one last question, if you're up for staying on a little bit longer, Adam.
I don't mind.
Yeah, brilliant. So Catherine, I want to ask you a question and then we'll wrap up and finish up. Thanks, everybody.
Oh, I just want to say how much I've loved this evening, and I love what you just said about the intersectional in politics. So my question's about crossing over. I was really fascinated by, you talked about medicine and art, and you said theatre's like science and art, and that was a light bulb moment for me. I just love to hear you say a little bit more about the science and the art coming together, because I found that fascinating.
Yeah, I remember I'd always had this thought that I couldn't make art because I was a science nerd, and I was a nerd. I don't know, I wasn't cool, and and the idea of, and I wasn't particularly good at humanities, I suppose. So I people were much better at me than like English and literature, and so I remember thinking, I've got things I have to say and I want to say, and I felt very moved by films and graphic novels and video games even, but I just didn't know I could be an artist, I suppose. And but I really liked theatre. It just got to me in a way that nothing else really had. And I remember my first assisting job, I got very lucky and I got to assist Terry Johnson, who I assisted a lot. And his plays really do live at the intersection of art and science as well, if you think of things like Hysteria and Insignificance. And well, the reason I wrote to him initially is because I'd seen Insignificance, and it was like, you know, a science play. I'm always really into science plays. And he just went, well, there's nothing wafty about it. If someone's going to do something 8 times a week, they've got to know, it's like scaffolding. It's like building. And I remember thinking, and comedy, you know, similar thing. It's making someone laugh. The laugh itself feels spontaneous. The act of making someone laugh is deeply, rigorously structured. You know, the timing of it, the way it hits, and the rhythm. And I just suddenly was like, this light bulb went on my head, like, oh man, this is a science and an art. And actually, I knew people who were like who I was anxious about because they felt like they were artists, and actually I came to realize that I really liked the structure of it all. I really liked saying, you know, if this, then this, then this. And if that thing about lining things up, you know, felt like directing to me. It's like that thought with that move, with that gesture, with that lighting gesture or that sound gesture, that stack, that verticality. For me, it's that creating a kind of vertical, like line of everything and making sure it all lines up, but there's still enough space, and not that it feels, it's funny because now I'm talking about it, it makes it sound like potentially that I'm a control freak, but actually I actually love the thing about theatre, that so much of it is discovered by accident, or rather, you know, like, you know one thing, and you know that one thing, and then you start in a rehearsal room with that one thing, and then something like bumps into it and magnetizes, and you like now know two things, and then those two things become more gravitational and pull in other things, and suddenly you know what it is. I mean, I don't do tons of preparation before going into a rehearsal room as a director, because I like that feeling of a network of people who are like, if they understand all of the rules, that it will all fit together. And I'll just say this one at the risk of going on too long, I'll just say this thing. I'm obsessed with scene changes and transitions. And the reason I'm obsessed with transitions is because often there's like way too much going on all at the same time for anyone to really discern exactly what's happening. And I once did some teaching on how to direct scene changes. And the way you direct a scene change is you say everything that needs to happen, and then you do it all at the same time. And then you go, oh, if you do that at the same time, they'll crash into one another. So you delay, and then, oh, you can't take the table until the tablecloth's taken off. So you go first with the, and you gradually like take this tangle of mess of everything happening at the same time, and you just like pull it outwards until it makes sense. And that feels like science to me, actually. People can think of science as this kind of like very delicate accumulation of known quantities, but actually most of the time it's just like doing everything at once and like sorting through it in a or everything happening at once, and you sort through it in a kind of rigorous way. Anyway, I just love I just love those two halves of the brain being active at the same time. And I think yeah, I would say that theatre is potentially the most scientific of all of the art forms in terms of the amount of variables you need to put at once. And although film, as I've done bits and bobs of film, and I don't love editing, film you can do a load of work afterwards to organize everything, and you can overshoot it and figure it out. Theatre, you do all of the work in advance, and then it all has to just work. So for me, it feels even more like this like plan. Like anything else you can fix as you go. Theatre you can't fix as you go. It has to work when it starts. So I love that about it. Anyway, I went on too long. Thanks, everyone.
No, never. Anyway, thank you so much, Adam. That was wonderful.
That was so cool. I feel like I don't know. I learned things about myself. Thank you for letting me.
It was, yeah, really insightful and engaging. And I always feel like spaces like that Neil's created with this and the Finborough's created are sort of like little pockets of community, and like the way our industry kind of churns through people and burns through people. And I think that like the past couple of years it's really emphasized that these pockets of community are really important, and one of the major things that you do is create pockets of community, and it's like intrinsically built into your career. So thank you also for that, amongst everything else. I certainly felt very welcome as part of what you've created. So
well, everyone's welcome, and I think we I think people come into theatre with preconceptions about where they have to be, when they have to be there, and like what a successful life looks like, and what it means to be happy, and the way we peg that all together. And I'm just aware that like that's a really stupid way to approach theatre. I think I started out thinking this is what I have to do, and if I don't, I won't be doing it right. And the more I get through it, I would just say when I'm working on a new musical and they're bloody hard, I always say, when you do a first read through or a first workshop, I always say, we're not going to talk about what doesn't work. We're going to look at what shines. We're going to look at the shiny bits, and we're going to just work outwards from those moments. Like, because anything, well, you'll always, oh my God, it's that moment doesn't matter about anything else. That moment shone. And so, and I'm just trying to think about a career in theatre like that. It's an imperfect.
Yeah, oh,
but
that's
it's
a
got
lovely image to
it's got
finish with.
shiny bits.
Yeah, that's a very lovely image to finish with. Wonderful.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, thank
Okay,
you.
I'll just do my parish notices, if I may. Thank you, Adam. And
Thanks, Neil.
you know where we are when
I
you want
do.
to come back.
I'd love that.
We would love to do more musicals. Unfortunately, it's money and the number of our seats.
I
But
know,
we
but
would really want to do more. So just parish notices. We've lost our January and our February show. You know why. But we're continuing our online stuff, picking up on what Adam was saying about streaming. We've got 2 films, an Earl's Court Miscellany, which is poetry, music, poetry, all kinds of things, all set and filmed around Earl's Court, which starts on the 28th of January. And then How to Make a Revolution by Izzo Amro and an Activism, filmed in the West Bank and in the UK, and really good. That will be on from the 31st, all for a month, all entirely for free. So do watch those, and hopefully we'll be back in March, live. Thank you.
I'll wait.
Shall we say goodbye?
Yes.
Thanks,
Now's the
everyone.
time to say goodbye. Goodbye.
Bye all. Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you, Adam.
Thank you, Adam.
Thank you. It really was terrific.
Oh, thank you.